Bret Hart wasn't just the excellence of execution, he was the excellence of irritation, to a whole lot of wrestlers who thought he believed his own hype. Behind the shades and the self-serious promos, Bret's reputation backstage was divisive, respected by fans, resented by peers. To some, he was a ring general. To others, a self-appointed moral compass of the business, a guy who handed out lectures like candy, then cried when he got handed receipts. From locker rooms in Calgary to the chaos of WWE and WCW, Bret built enemies who didn't just talk behind his back. They shot on him, straight to camera, with venom and decades of buried resentment. In this video, we're diving into the ones who couldn't fake their hate for Bret if they tried. The guys who saw through the hitman image and hit back harder. Let's pull the trigger, because these aren't promos, they're shoots. Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels didn't have heat. They had an inferno that torched locker rooms and redefined betrayal. By 1997, Shawn wasn't just irritating Bret, he was publicly humiliating him. Bret was the moral preacher of wrestling. Shawn was the chaos junkie who treated respect like a punchline. Vince McMahon stood between them, watching two egos fight to the death while counting pay-per-view buys. Shawn Michaels never hid what he thought of Bret Hart. He flat out said it. Bret took himself way too seriously. He thought he was the moral authority of wrestling, Shawn wrote years later. He wasn't intimidated by Bret. Shawn saw Bret as a guy who preached integrity while politicking behind the scenes. He said Bret had a holier-than-thou complex and needed the world to know how real he was. So Shawn went to war. Not in the ring, but in interviews, promos, and the locker room. He started mocking Bret on TV, calling him a dinosaur who'd never get with the time. Then came the Sunny Days promo. Shawn's smirking claim that Bret was sleeping with Tammy Sitch. Totally baseless, but lethal. Bret's marriage was on the rocks. The boys laughed. Bret wanted to cave his face in. Shawn Michaels doubled down years later, saying, "Yeah, I said it because I knew it'd piss him off. Mission accomplished." Behind the curtain, he bragged about his pull with Vince. He told people Bret was replaceable, that the company didn't need another crybaby with pink tights. He even mocked Bret for caring about his matches, saying, "It's not Shakespeare, it's a fake fight. Lighten up." Backstage, the tension exploded in Hartford. Bret slammed Shawn into a wall and ripped a handful of his hair clean out. Shawn stormed into Vince's office, yelling, "I'm not working with that motherfucker anymore." Vince smirked. "Yeah, you are." The Montreal Screwjob was the exclamation point on years of venom. No script, no stunt, just betrayal on live television. Shawn later admitted, "Yeah, I was an asshole, but he made it too easy." And Bret never forgave that. Not really. Their handshake years later wasn't reconciliation. It was a ceasefire between two men who'd already destroyed each other's reputations. When Bret looked at Shawn, he didn't see redemption. He saw the guy who broke the code, and smiled doing it. When Ric Flair shoots on someone, it's usually playful. When he talks about Bret Hart, it's personal. Flair never respected Bret the way fans did. In his 2004 book, To Be the Man, Rick torched him. Bret Hart couldn't draw flies. He was overrated, dull, and believed his own press. That wasn't storyline heat. That was the real Flair, pissed off that Bret trashed him first. That was Flair's way of saying Bret had zero charisma. Flair didn't respect the excellence of execution gimmick. He thought Bret wrestled like a robot, technically perfect, but emotionally empty. To Flair, wrestling was entertainment. To Bret, it was religion. That made Bret insufferable in Rick's eyes. Bret fired back in Hitman, calling Flair's matches repetitive and claiming Rick would do the same 10 spots in every city. That set Flair off. He went on High Spots years later saying, "Bret's never drawn a dime. If he wasn't Canadian, nobody would have cared." Flair also ripped Bret for blaming everyone but himself in WCW. When Bret called the company disorganized, Flair snapped, "Everybody had the same management, but only Bret had a meltdown." He was miserable because he wasn't the top guy. He wasn't done. Flair mocked Bret's lingering bitterness over Montreal. "He's still crying about it. Get over it. You got paid millions." Even when Bret had his stroke, Flair said, "I wished him well, but we'll never be friends." Flair thought Bret was humorless and self-righteous. Bret thought Flair was fake and lazy. They weren't rivals. They were two different species. Flair danced, drank, and lived for the crowd. Bret lectured, sulked, and lived for the craft. Both legends, zero respect, and a grudge that outlived the business itself. Steve Austin and Bret Hart changed wrestling together, but off camera, they barely tolerated each other. What started as mutual respect slowly turned into quiet resentment wrapped in professional courtesy. Bret liked to remind people that he made Austin a star. Austin never forgot that, or forgave the arrogance behind it. In his podcast, Austin once said, "I respect Bret. He's one of the best I ever worked with, but he's wound too tight. I couldn't deal with all that drama." Their chemistry in the ring was perfect, but backstage it was oil and water. Bret was serious to a fault, obsessed with control and match structure. Austin was raw instinct. No scripts, no politics, just fight. Bret didn't understand me. I didn't kiss ass. I didn't ask permission. That rubbed him wrong. After their classic WrestleMania 13 match, Bret started talking like he passed the torch. Austin hated that phrase. He said, "Nobody passed me nothing. I earned it." That's when the cracks became real. Years later, Austin admitted he found Bret hard to be around, said he was always pissed off at something. When Bret's book came out, Austin refused to comment publicly, saying only, "He lives in his head too much. I just moved on." There was never a fight, just two men who were too good, too proud, and too stubborn to like each other. Austin respected Bret's legacy. He just didn't want to have a beer with him. The most famous betrayal in wrestling wasn't an angle, it was a hit job. Vince McMahon and Bret Hart didn't just fall out, they detonated in front of the world. Bret was the loyal company man, 12 years deep, carrying Vince's WWF during the steroid scandal. He turned down WCW offers for years because he believed Vince when he said, "Your family." Then, in 1997, Bret signed a 20-year deal with Vince, only for Vince to tear it up a year later saying he couldn't afford it. Translation: "Go to WCW before I fire you." Bret agreed to leave, but refused to drop the WWF title to Shawn Michaels in Montreal. He told Vince, "I'll drop it to anyone else, just not him." Vince pretended to agree, then double-crossed him live on pay-per-view. As Shawn had Bret in the sharpshooter, Vince called for the bell. Bret hadn't tapped. The Montreal Screwjob was born. Bret spat in Vince's face, destroyed monitors, and punched him backstage so hard his eyes swelled shut. That wasn't a work. It was pure betrayal. Vince went on Raw the next week, smug and unapologetic. "Bret screwed Bret," he said, smirking like a man who'd just killed a saint on camera. The crowd hated him. Vince loved it. That's the day the Mr. McMahon character was born, and the day Bret walked out of the company that built him. For years, Vince tried to justify it as business. Bret called it the ultimate sellout. They reconciled on TV in 2010, but it was ice cold. A handshake built on money, not forgiveness. Vince created the Screwjob, but Bret made it immortal. The story of Bret Hart isn't just about championships or legendary matches. It's the grudges, the real-life heat, the people who couldn't stand the guy, from Shawn Michaels to Vince McMahon. Every quote, every backstage insult, every shoot interview shows the man they loved to hate. Bret was brilliant, meticulous, and utterly polarizing. Some revered him, others despised him. And that hate, it lasted decades. It shaped careers, burned bridges, and left a legacy that wasn't just excellence in the ring, it was excellence in making enemies. If you're loving these backstage shots and real-life heat, hit like and subscribe. Drop a comment with who you want exposed next. No scripts, no kayfabe, just the raw truth from the locker room. Stay tuned. The next video's ammo is even messier. Thanks for watching.